Right, so first and foremost, one of the most important things to keep in mind when you're going to design any of these things is to actually make sure that your data set is sorted out. So a lot of what we did in the first two sessions was all about making sure that we have a data set that we can work with. So just in short, just to explain what this data set that you see over here actually is, it's just a bit of a simplified version of the other one. We've got our name list, which is just where we draw names from. So I've actually generated 100 names. These are all random names, and they've been assigned to grades 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And then each class, we've got a class A and B. I just want to change this one quickly. So we've got a class A and B, and then we generate, that's how we have our class list. And then when we look at the entries, just to pick up from where we left off, remember this is a data studio that we're going to build to kind of represent this in a way that's more digestible, that you can actually understand what's going on. So I've actually generated 1,000 entries here for these 100 learners, all capturing their academic or their various offenses. So we've only set it, there are 3 types of offenses: academic, late, and behavior. But obviously when you are building your own system, you can do this any way that you want to. I know Anthony's in this session. I actually had a look at a system that he's actually already started building, which is really great to see. And his is a little bit different than this, but obviously the actual implementation is going to be entirely based on the need that you have in your school. So once we have our data set ready, everything is there, everything's good to go. You can change this later. That's one thing I want to say. You can actually add columns and change things. However, it's a lot easier to make sure everything is kind of ready to go when you start with your data studio. So this is our simple data set that we've got set up. Now we're going to go and start building our data studio. So to get to data studio, we just simply enter the address datastudio.google.com. So I am going to try and give you a little bit of time to do these things on your own as well. So you're going to have to be able to switch Alt-Tab between this presentation and what you're doing on your end. But we do have a bit of limited time, so we might move reasonably quickly. Just keep that in mind. Right, so once we're in Data Studio, we're going to create a new report, a blank report. Right, so when you create your blank report, it's going to set it up. The first thing that it asks for is where it's going to get the data from. So there's a whole bunch of different options here that you can use. Whatever you need to use. I know a lot of things generate CSV files, so you can actually upload CSV files as well and integrate that. But we want to be using Google Sheets because of the fact that it's going to be dynamically updating the whole time. So that means our Data Studio can update along with it. Now, when we select Google Sheets, what it'll do is let me just zoom in a bit here. It's going to give us all the different Google Sheets that we worked on recently. So there's just a whole bunch of different sheets that I've been fiddling around with recently. If you don't find it over here, your Data Studio, you can or your data set at least, you can go and type in a search to go and search for the thing. You can go to Owned by Me, Shared with Me, etc. But sometimes the easiest of them all is just to go to URL and just go there. We'll copy the URL that we have of our Google Sheet. We're going to go there and we'll paste it in there. So I'm just going to paste that specific URL here in the chat so that you can use that one if you want to pull in the same data set. Otherwise, you can just sit back and have a look at what we're doing. Right. So once you do that, it asks you to identify which of the worksheets you want to do. Now, before I go any further, what I do want to point out is you have the option of actually connecting multiple data sources to one Google Sheet. Not Google Sheet, to one Data Studio. So I'm not going to show you how to blend data, but that is also a possibility, but that gets a lot more complicated. It's usually easier, in my opinion, to blend your data when it comes to the your Google Sheet. What I mean by blend data, those are things that we looked at. When you import some data from one sheet and you import it from another sheet and you just combine it into one long set of data. It's easier to do it, I feel, definitely on Google Sheets, but it can be done here. However, we're going to have a look at, if we have time, we'll look at how do we include two data sets a bit later. So here we're going to select entries because that's where we want to work with this information that we see over here. That's the key thing that we are interested in. So we'll select entries and we're going to add that to our DataStudio. Right, it takes a while to run through all of it. And what it does, and you'll see now over here, I'm sorry, I just need to quickly sign in here. Just give me a sec. Apologies for this. I thought it was signed in. Right, so what you'll see over here on this side, these are the same as your column headers that you'll see over here, right? So you'll see here I've got my column headers over there, timestamp, ID key, learner, surname, learner name, class, grade, teacher, offense, description, and that's exactly the same as I have over here, as you can see. So whenever you make a change, just keep that in mind. So if I were to go to my set of data over here, and I were actually to rename one of my columns, then my whole DataStudio is going to break. I'll show you how we fix it a bit later, but just keep that in mind. That's why I say it's very important to make sure that you have your data set ready or essentially set up in a way that you think you're going to use it before you build your DataStudio. Again, it's not a train smash. Almost every single DataStudio I've worked with, I have had to change at a later stage, so you can obviously still do it. Right, so once I've got that, let's have a look at the different types of charts that we can add. So there's a whole bunch of different charts we can use. These are all different ways of using a kind of graphical representation of data. Now, most of these you should have seen before, and you should be quite familiar with it based on what you saw, based on working in Excel or working in Google Sheets and drawing graphs and tables, etc. So we'll get back to that a bit later, but we're going to start off with a basic one, which I think forms the core function very often of DataStudio, and that is how we insert a table. So we kind of want to be able to have this represented as a table over here. Now, what happens by default when you begin a DataStudio, it'll create a table. So there is my table. It's been set up. Now I can start populating it with various things. So over here, there are two things that you need to be mindful of. You've got your dimensions and you've got your metrics. So the dimensions are the values of the things. So when you put things into dimensions, it'll essentially just print out the same kind of value that it gets from your Google Sheet. When you add things to the metric column or to the metric part, then that will be represented as a number. So essentially what my table is showing me now is this ID key, A053, has 18 offenses in total, right? So there are 18 offenses. A021 has 17 offenses, etc., which doesn't really mean all that much to me because at this point in time, I'm not really concerned about that. I want to know what these people's names are. So changing that is actually quite simple. We've got the ID key, and it's a case of you can either click on it, and it'll give you all the options. Let me just quickly remove everything here. It'll give you all the options. So I have learner surname, learner name, and I've got all those different things. So let's just go into we're going to replace this with learner surname and learner name. Right. So now it's starting to make a little bit more sense to me. Now it's starting to look like data and information that I can start using a bit more because I don't have to try and memorize 100 ID keys. Right, I see Jason has also joined us. Welcome, Jason. And Jason, just keep in mind we're a small group, so you are more than welcome to use your mic and ask questions and say things if there's anything that you want to know. Just on a side note, unfortunately, I only have my one monitor at home, so I'm kind of running it. I'm not able to check the chat the whole time, so please feel free to just unmute yourself and interrupt.
Good day, Jaco. Thank you for inviting me to this meeting.
Always a pleasure, Jason. Right. So now that we've got something like this set up, let's try and look at how we can actually get a little bit, or how we could add a little bit more value to it. So we're going to drag in a couple of more values. For example, we want to add the grade in. So let's add grade. Okay, so there's a grade in there. And now we're going to add the, that thing I want to add. Not offense now. So we're going to add grade in, and we're going to add class. Right. So now I've got my thing set up like this, but it is sorting it according to the number of offenses that they have. And maybe I don't want to have these things written exactly like that. So there's a couple of things we could still fiddle with here in terms of the appearance. The first thing that I always feel is quite essential to do is to just change our headers, because learner surname, learner name, we know we're talking about the learners. So when you want to edit that, you'll see here on the side there's a little, if you hover over the ABC part, the ABC tells me it's a string. So if I hover over that, it becomes editable, and now I can change the name to what I want. So we're just going to replace learner surname with surname. Right, so there we have surname. We'll change learner name to name. All right, grade and class we're still okay with. So at this point, what actually usually works quite well is to kind of fiddle around. A lot of what you end up being able to show depends on the way that you've collected the information, right? Depends on how how it's being fed in by the DataStudio. So something, for example, that we might want to be able to do is we might want to show the different kinds of offenses that they have. Unfortunately, the way we've put together our DataStudio here would make that a little bit more tricky. So if you wanted to add that there, you need to add a little bit more, how should we say, we're going to have to draw information from a different source to kind of split this record count into the different types of offenses. So, well, I'll get to that a little bit later. What we want to do now is we want to make sure that we sort this thing in a way that makes sense, because this doesn't really make sense. So I can decide how I want to sort it by just scrolling down, and you'll see here we have the sort function. But at the moment, it is sorting it according to the record count. So now we're going to change that because we don't want it to sort according to record count. We'll click here. Its primary sort field is going to be the surname. And for some reason, Google DataStudio loves doing it in reverse. So we'll just change it to ascending. We'll add a secondary sort. We're going to make that name, and we'll make that ascending as well. Right. So now we've got it's starting to look a little bit better. It's starting to make a bit more sense. But now the real power of DataStudio, we're going to start looking at the real power of DataStudio, and that is when we start adding controls to what we do. So here at the top, we've got this option, add control. So what the control is, the control allows me to add different kinds of switches between these things. So you could include a drop-down list, and my drop-down list, I'm going to make, in the drop-down list, I will use grade as my option. Right, so now it's going to give me different grades. I could add a different control. Let's say we're going to have the fixed list. So the fixed list is a little bit different just use class here. So the fixed list is a little bit different in that it's not a drop down. It's always going to display like that. So we'll have that kind of thing, and I'm going to show you how we can fiddle around with that still a little bit more to make it look a bit nicer. Right, we'll take that out. Okay, we'll fiddle with this a bit later. So what's nice now, and let's have a look at what this thing actually does. So we've got this thing set up. Let's start applying some filters. Remember, we're in the edit mode. So in edit mode, you can't actually apply these things. Well, you can in a sense, but we'll get to that a bit later. But we want to get, whenever you want to see if your filters and your things are working, you should go straight into your view mode, because the view mode is the thing that's going to really show you if things are working the way that you want them to work. So let's go to view. Here we've got our thing set up like that. Now I'm going to apply my first filter, which is going to be my grade. I'm going to only want to see my grade 10 entries. So now it only shows the grade 10 entries. I only want to see class B's entries, and now I'm filtering it and I'm seeing all these things. Now the great thing is what you can also do, if you are interested in seeing the top offenders, if you click on record count, it will sort it according to the most entries. So now I know that Irene Randolph has the most entries. She has 15 entries in 10B. Right. So what's also useful, another very important control to keep in mind when you're going to start putting this thing together, is the ability to filter according to date. Now remember, these things become more and more powerful the more historical data you actually have to compare it to. To give you a sense of how far you can take this thing, I'm just going to erase that part quickly. Google Sheets limits you to 50 million cells, and all of that can be pulled in. So because we are using, what would this be? We're using 9 columns. That means you can do 50 million divided by 9. That's how many entries you can have. So you can do the math. You can run this thing for the duration of a school learner's time. Because if your school is getting more than 5 million behavior entries in a 10-year period, then there might be something that needs to change. So you can really run a system like this indefinitely. You're not going to get to that 50 million mark anytime soon. But it doesn't help if we have all sorts of old antiquated data that's pulling through. We want to have kind of the date control that we're going to build in. So let's add this date range control, right? So when we do that, we'll add this date range control, put that in there. Now, because we are actually capturing a date as part of our data set, this timestamp is effectively acting as our date. Now I can filter these things per month. So let's have a look. If I want to change that, I'm going to just take this auto date range. We'll change it to this month. So I want to check the offenses for this month only. Suddenly it starts changing a lot, as you can see. So that date ranges becomes a very important thing. Now, what I like to do with these date ranges, depending on how you're going to use the tool, is to change it by default in the editor. So if it's in this editor, any of these things can actually be predefined. So even this grade. So let's take this as an example. If I want to open up this sheet and it's predefined that it's going to show grade 10, then I can actually enter a value in there, right? So I enter the value grade 10. What that means is anyone who opens this DataStudio will by default have this filter set to grade 10. If I leave it blank, it's obviously going to just stay blank. It's going to be open. So this one is quite useful to turn it to go to this month or last month or this month to date, depending on how you want to use it. So this month, now it's only going to track the entries for October by default. But when I open it up and I want to have a look at, okay, so what actually happened last month, then it opens it up and we can have a look at that. I hope you're starting to understand how these filters work and how you can kind of control the way that you look at this data set using these filters. So the filters become very important for you to kind of determine what set of data you would like to look at. Okay, now can I just get a thumbs up if everyone's kind of still with us? Please, if you've got questions, do not hesitate to ask. Right, Christelle's still with us. I hope the other three are still keeping up, or playing around, fiddling around, seeing what they're doing. Remember, that is ultimately one of the most important things with DataStudio, is to kind of play around and see what helps and what's useful. Now, something else that I think becomes a nifty thing to have is to have the scorecard thing. So we had a look at the table. There's obviously other things that you can have with the table if you wanted to. Let's quickly transform this one. Oh yes, before we go on to anything else, let's just look at how we can make this look a little bit nicer. So there are two settings for every thing that you pull in. There's the data side of things, where we determine the kind of things that go in here, and then we've also got the style, where we define what it looks like. So here we have, on the top, we have something, conditional formatting. Now, I'm a big fan of conditional formatting because I think visually things need to stand out as much as possible for me to be able to make important decisions quickly. So let's add a little conditional formatting thing in here. We are going to add the option, single color. We are going to look at the record count. If the record count is greater than, and this is just basic reading that you need to do, 4. Now you'll see there's ways that you can compare different cells to each other, etc., etc. So you can do lots of very, very interesting things with this. There's obviously a color scale that you can also apply, where the people, when they start going beyond a certain number, then it starts highlighting it more and more and more in red. Actually, let's do that. That could be quite cool, actually. So we're going to base it on the record count. No, never mind. We'll go back to single color. Right, because the color scale won't change the entire row. The color scale changes the single cell that it's in. So this is a great thing if you've got marks and things that are being pulled in, to highlight good marks in green and marks that are not so great in red, or in purple if you don't want to see the color red, depending on what you want to do. So we're going to go and we're going to say record count is greater than, let's say, 3 or 4, because we're looking at a month-to-month thing. So we don't want our learners to have more than 4 the 4 entries, really. Otherwise, we are a little bit worried about that. So now we take the entire row is going to be highlighted in just a light red. Remember, there needs to be text printed on it, and you need to be able to kind of read it. So if you're going to highlight it in a dark red, no, it's highlighted in a dark red, because as far as I don't know, it's not being smart about it. So there immediately I can pick up, oh wait, here's a problem. There's a learner that we need, that has been identified as being highlighted, that we need to deal with, right? So now when I open this up, I'll get a very quick view. If I only take my grade 12s, there's already 2 that I can pick up, and I'll take my grade 8s. There are some that I can pick up, right? So this is a useful little tool to be able to immediately determine or spots and things like that, right? Now let's just go on with making it look a little bit nicer. Style, here we've got the option to change the font size, to change the font color. We've got this alternating row thing, which is always, I think, a little bit easier to read if we do something like that. No, we don't want to do that. So we've got our header. So now suddenly you can just play around with making it a bit easier, nicer to read, etc., etc. And we can do that with all of these different things. We can disable the search box because we don't really want it. You can apply single select. Single select is going to allow you to only select A or B, or we can leave it open. So you can play around with the look and feel of the thing, because I think it's important that it needs to be visually easy to understand what's happening, and how to kind of manipulate and modify things on there. Right. And if you're selecting multiple things, you can still have the style option, but you'll see it gives me very few options because this is the only common kind of thing that you can do. So I can select both of them and say, we just want to add shadows. So it'll be able to apply that. But if you're going to select two tables, then it'll have a lot of shared things on the style side of things. Right. So here we've got a very basic little start to our system that we have over here. Now, the next thing I want to show you that I think is always useful is using these scorecards.
Sorry,
right. So this. Hello.
Just a question.
Yes.
Is it only me or can the others see your screen, because I only see the logo that says JN.
Right. Can someone else just confirm? Can you see my screen? Anyone else?
They can see your screen now.
They can see. It's okay. Usually if that happens, Jason, it could be an internet, because remember it's going to prioritize audio ahead of visual. So okay. That could be the issue. Otherwise, just check if there's a presentation that you can pin or unpin or something like that.
Okay, thank you, Jaco.
Or just do the good old-fashioned log out, log in again, see if that works.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Right. So if we've got this set up, sorry, I don't want to do that. Now we want to start adding the scorecard. So the scorecard, as you can see, these two are essentially the same thing. The one is just one with smaller numbers and the other one's with bigger numbers. So it's in a way a big scorecard, a small scorecard. So I like to have this one that just pops up and immediately just shows me the total. Right, so there's the total record count. We don't want the total. Yes, the total record count is fine. Now, then what I want to show you is how we can apply filters to this. How we can take this thing and actually filter it out to certain offenses. Now, remember, we said we can't filter our different offenses, but there are parts where we can do it. So you're right at the bottom, and filters can be applied across any kind of thing. So we're going to create a filter. Now, this is where it starts becoming a little bit more tricky. Let's call this grade 8. Or well, let's start with the behavior, the academic, stuff like that. Right, so we're going to say academic. And what we want to say is we're going to actually exclude. Either one would work, actually. So we're going to say exclude offense contains, well, let's just say first try this. Include offense contains academic. So now, in other words, what it'll do is the offense itself has to say academic. So now we can change this and we'll say academic entries. Right? So there we've got our one thing over there, academic entries. We'll make a copy of that. This one, we're going to just remove that filter. Just one thing that's important to understand. Filters are created to be applied across all of our different sessions or all of our different items. So I can't go and edit that one, because if I edit it, I'll change it for both. So now we'll add another one. We're going to create a new filter. We'll call this one behavior. Include offense contains behavior. Right. So the other thing that you also need to keep in mind, there's an equal, contain, starts with, So there's a lot of different options here again that you can use. One of the things that's really useful is this is null if you're dealing with content that might have a blank entry. To just have a filter on that says exclude anything that says is null, and then it throws that out. So we're going to save. We'll keep this one. So now we've got our academic entries. This one was our behavior entry. Right, I think you get the idea. I'm not going to go through all of them. So in that way, you can quickly add these little keys for yourself that you can have a look at. And what's quite nice is you can, if you've got this historical data, you can actually add comparisons to it, right? So we'll say previous period. What that means is comparison, previous, no, not previous year, previous period. So it's actually going to now compare how have entries changed between the different months. Is it going up? Is it going down? Etc. etc. Which I think is quite a useful little thing to be able to keep track of what's going on. So now what you could do, you could technically go and say, let's have a look at my grade 12 A class. Right, have they changed? So they had 7 academic entries in September. They had 7 academic entries in October. Let's have a look at last month. What happened last month? Right, 7, 7. So they actually had more entries, or that, yes, they had more entries the month before. So you kind of get the sense of what's happening. It's a bit weird because we want those things to be red and not to be green in this instance. But that gives me that kind of quick overview immediately, which is quite a nice little thing to be able to have a look at. Now, actually, let's make this. What am I doing? So let's get to some grids, some grids that we can add. Now, my suggestion, honestly, what I would do when I get to this point, or before I do that, I want to show you something else that I think is also useful. So when you start designing your whole sheet, it's going to take you time to build it. It's going to take time to think about it. And you can obviously start adding more and more things in, the more that people start considering what they can do with this whole system. But what I really strongly suggest is that you have some kind of little thing that you start over here with. Let's just say text, and we're going to call this generic school report. Right. So we've got generic school discipline report. We'll change that to a nice big font size, and we'll make that, turn that into something that looks a bit space age. Regardless of what you do, once you've got that set up, any item that you click on that's like a text or images or anything like that that you add, if you turn it into make report level, and you've got your usual controls, bring forward, bring backwards, etc., etc. Once you make it make report level, what's nice now is when we want to move on, and we're going to now build a second page. When we build a second page, whatever is report level automatically moves to the next page. So you can do that for all of these things. So we're going to make these 3 things, all of them report level. So when we add a page, you'll see they automatically come across to my new page. Anything that I turn into report level. So in all likelihood, there's a couple of filters that you're always going to have. You're always going to want to use your date, your grade, your class. Those things are going to be part of your report level at all times. Or not, I mean, these things are likely in this instance going to be part of what we want to do. So now let's start having a look at adding some nice, interesting graphics here. So we're going to start with adding a pie. Let's do a pie chart, because I think a pie chart is often one of the first things we do when we add graphics, because these are always an easy way to represent something. So when I'm adding my pie chart, it's going to pull up some very random, nonsensical option. In this instance, it's going to give me a pie chart of the ID keys, which really makes no sense. So now we can start adding things that you know won't have as many. So you can use your offense as an ID key. Right, so there are my offenses. Let's add another one and do another pie chart. If you want to be, okay, I'll show you how to do that in a second. So they've got another pie chart. I want to have a look at the teacher names. What are they doing? All right, so I've got 5 teachers that I'm using in the school. And here I can immediately see Miss Salma Ortiz is the meanest of the lot. She's been giving the most entries. so far. Now I can also go and insert. Actually, no, I want to show you how we can change this now. If you've already inserted this thing and you want to change the style of the thing. So again, all of them have a lot of different things. I'm not going to go through all of those details just to make it get the look and feel that you want. The donut chart, as people call it, is very easy to change. Then we can just cut a hole out and then we've got a little donut there. But if you want to actually change your whole thing, if you click here at the top, your chart style, you can change it into something else. You can change it into a bar chart, for example, or the stack chart. Not sure what this is going to be doing. So this could actually be a very useful little thing here, because now we've got a couple of different things that we have over here. Let's pull in a fence and see. Right, so here it gives me a breakdown of the type of offenses that they are assigning, as you can see. So here we can immediately get a look at this is what the different types of offenses are. So Salma Ortiz, she's doing all of those things. Then, of course, what's useful is to show the data labels. So now I can quickly pick up what's happening. So she's actually giving the most late entries and the most behavior entries. So she's really been hard on the kids so far. But it's only been this month. So we can change that filter depending on how you look at the month. This gives you a pretty interesting way of breaking down the kinds of the kind of behavior of your teachers as well, because I think everyone understands some teachers like awarding different things. I want to just quickly get back to this because I want to show you another very cool trick that you can use. So a lot of things become just trying to remember where that is. Right. So a lot of things are actually able to be useful as filters. And that's what I like about pie charts quite often. So I just want to show you where I changed that. On your pie chart, if you scroll right to the bottom, and a lot of the different things have this option where you can have this chart interactions, the sorting, etc., etc. Now, when you add these elements, when I do that, I click on something and it actually uses that as a filter. Right, so you can see immediately I'm actually changing when I select certain things, it's going to change the kind of entries that we are getting. So I'm only looking at the behavior at the moment, or the late. Now it's only looking at the late. Now that can apply to my first page as well. So I could take this thing, I just want to show you there. I'll copy it, and I go back to my first page, and I'll paste it over here. So here we've got a little chart. Now we just need to find a little spot for it. I'm just going to put it in there for now. It's not a great now. Put it here at the bottom. So that can still be used to filter out all of this information, right? So now I'm filtering out all of the information, as you can see. So that's a very, very, very useful way of kind of filtering through these things. Now, again, what you have to understand when we look at DataStudio provides you with the information. The key thing is you need to analyze and try and make sense of it and understand it as we go along, right? I see we've got some more people that have joined us. Welcome to the session. Yes, Jason.
Jaco, just a question. So if you show the data according to the date on top, will the pie chart also adjust to that sort that you applied?
Yes, every single sort that you apply applies to everything that you see. So if I change this date to, for example, I think where you'll see it well, I'm going to change this one again to that stacked bar chart, because this is quite a cool chart. I think this is a very useful one. So if I now go and change all of that, or change this one to not this month, we'll do it to last month, apply, everything gets resorted, everything gets changed again. So now suddenly we've got someone else is in the lead. Mrs. Ortiz is still there or thereabouts, but we've got this other Mrs. Hutchinson. is now the person who's assigned the most entries. And suddenly there's a lot of behavior entries that's coming through that wasn't there. So any filter that you apply will be added to this. To track historical data, because I think that's another key thing, why we want to build a system that we can start using as soon as possible to track the information about a learner from quite an early age already. So let's take another chart, the time series. So we kind of looked at the tables, the scorecards, we looked at the bar charts, the pie charts. You won't use all of these things. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can use. You can even try and add pivot tables. I'm not a big pivot table fan, to be honest, so I've never really used them in here. There's a bunch of things in here that I've never used. They've even, as true to Google style, they've got the option of adding community visualization. So like you've got add-ons and plugins. There are so many things you can do with this, right? But I want to show you when we add the timeline series, how this becomes very useful. Let's take a smooth timeline series, and we're going to add it over here. There's my smooth timeline series. Now I've got how these things change in this time period, right? So I've only got October, but this is a little bit, I mean, it's not really helping me all that much. I would like to have a look at what's happening across the whole year. So the problem is what's happening here is it's using the date range that's defined here at the top, and it's applying it to this timesheet. So it's actually going to apply that one because I've told it to apply it over here, right? So it's actually applying it because it's been told to do that. All that you can do is you can remove that option there. Just take it out, and suddenly it's going to track all of the times that it can, which is not always the best idea, because sometimes you actually want to have a specific time on it. But in this instance, we want to keep it a bit more open, right? There is an option where I can't remember exactly where it is now. Right, you can if you have the default time set, just to when it says it is actually better idea not to remove that, because you can still, when you get to the default date range, you can say I'm going to have this one actually track this year. So when you set, just to show you again very quickly what I did, over here we've got the date range dimension, which has been defined, which is actually important to define. And here at the bottom, when I've got this default date range, this block over here gives me the ability to override whatever's happening in there, in that top one at least. So now I've got this, which still looks a little bit hectic because I'm looking at funny kind of data here that doesn't make all that much sense to me. Of the random dates that I assigned were only from the 1st of July up until I think today or something like that. So I still want this to change a little bit because I don't like these random dates, January 1st, January 27th, February 22nd. So that's when we get to the, again, back to this part where we were able to edit our different things. So here I want to edit my timestamp. It is going to use a date, but we're going to define the date that it's not just using whatever's being punched into it. It's going to take that and it's actually going to change it into month, right? So now when I do that, it'll give me a kind of curve on how these things have been changing, right? You can see, have a look at how it actually changes. I just want to try this quickly. If we pull a fence in, and now just wait for it quickly. Sometimes it can take a little bit longer to pull certain things in. Right, so now it's generating my lines for me over there, as you can see. So now I can actually see how these things have been changing, how the behavior has been changing. And again, like with everything else, I can apply my filters and I can check per grade, per class, how things have changed. Right, is this all still making sense? Are you all still with me? Then the last one, and in a way, probably one of the most important ones you need to look at, are just something that I want you to take note of. When you add pages, when you click on this page 2 of 2, when you get here, give your pages names, because otherwise it becomes confusing for anyone who needs to view your report. Let's call this home, and we're going to call this charts. And we want to add a new one called individual. Right. So now with the individual, I'm going to keep all of these filters that I had over here. Actually, this one is not necessary. Oh, wait. Before I delete that one, remember, because this is report level, if I delete it over here, you'll see it is now gone for everything on my report, because it's a report level thing. Report level things are always highlighted in with these the purple block. So I'm going to keep it here for now. Not that I'm really going to use it, but I'll just leave it there for now. I want to add another control, and this control I'm going to use the input box. This is where they literally get to type the ID key, which it has conveniently figured out for me. So now that I've got that, I can go back to the first page, sorry, over there, home, and I can copy this one and just go to my last page and add it, because ultimately what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to have a look at the individual things. Okay, actually, you know what, I'm just going to remove that one because it's not really going to tell me the information that I want. So let's go to add a chart. We'll add a new table. We're going to add that. There's my table. Okay, I'll show you in a second what I actually want to do here. I want to have the timestamp. I'm going to add that because I want the date when it happened. I want the teacher's name. I want the offense. And I actually want the description. Because remember, what we are now doing is we're actually getting we're trying to build something that you can get to. Now, we don't need a record count here, so we'll just remove that record count completely. And this becomes a description of the behavior record of an individual learner. Obviously, you can add filters to this as well. If you want to have a filter that shows only the teacher, then you can add that filter to this thing. What it's showing over here is it's actually going to just show everything essentially at the moment, because I haven't defined a default value. So when I do this, usually I go to the ID key and I will define a default value for it. Is it going to allow me to do that? Usually does. Oh wait, this one doesn't want to. Okay, so the ID key doesn't actually allow me to define. Anyway, so it doesn't allow me to define a default value. So this, what you see over here, is not going to make a lot of sense initially until you type in that ID key of the learner. So let's say we're going to go over here. We'll type A001, enter, and it'll pull up the details for the offense. So A001 has actually only committed one offense so far in this month. If we select the whole year, he might have done a bit more. Remember, this is all randomly generated, so I don't know who's been committing all these offenses. Right, so there's a lot more offenses. There's only the one in October, but here we've got one in July, August, September, etc. Now, the same things that we have over here with the charts. Sorry, I'm going to go quite quickly because Eskom is going to catch me pretty soon. The same thing that we have here with the charts, you could apply to the individual as well. So you can apply all of these different things. So let's go to home, for example, and we'll just go grab these academic entries and behavior entries. We'll copy them, and we'll go to our individual, and here we'll paste them. So now we've got these little scorecard things. Remember, we're still missing one thing that's there. We'll go back. We want to be able to have this little thing up here. And there we go. So we'll add this to the bottom to see how the behavior has been changing. Right, can you understand the idea that we have behind this? It really gives us incredible control over determining what is happening and what's going on in our schools. So if I were to go have a look here, I can now say I'm going to use, let's say, A0, something like that, and it'll pull up the information for this one. There we've got these 3 behavior entries. So that shows me it's gone up by 2. That means he had 1 behavior entry last term. Academic entries, it can't do the calculation because it doesn't actually have any academic entries this time. It's only got the late entry. So here I can have a look at how these things have been changing. So there's an upward curve, which is concerning, right? So this learner is showing an upward curve. If we, let's take the whole this year, apply. It's actually one of our well-behaved learners, only 5 entries so far in the system. But I hope that kind of shows you what you can do with something like this. Again, it is entirely reliant on historical data. And what I think is so great about it, if we go back and we have a look at this, this is the form that is kind of powering all of this. And technically, if you think back to session 2 that we did, the only things that you are capturing is you are capturing this ID key, and you're capturing if you've got a G Suite setup, you can actually do the teacher name based on the person who is completing the Google form. And here we're capturing the offense and the description. And if you consider how little effort it is to punch in that information for the level of depth that you can actually get out of a DataStudio, it really is quite incredible what you can do with a system like this. One last thing that I want to show you, and this is going to be the most technical of the stuff that we're going to do, and that is how we do calculations in our DataStudio itself. Wait, before I do that, I need to also point out when you build these DataStudios, they can be as public or as private as you want, because with the share functionality, it's like any kind of Google thing that you're doing. You can add people that have viewing rights. You can add them with editing rights. You can, if you want to, just open it up to anyone. If you're on if you've got a workspace, you can have anyone in your domain can view, which I think is a terrible idea if you are a school workspace, because that means the learners will be able to view this as well. But more specifically, you'll probably end up having a certain list of people that have access to this DataStudio to view what's happening. And what's also nice with this compared to using filters on a Google, with using filters in general, is whenever I'm applying filters, if I'm in the view mode, it's not affecting anyone else. That's only I'm the one that sees it. And of course, what you can do once you've if you, for example, let's say you have generated the report on the individual, this becomes, it's a learner that really is problematic, and you want to have this as a physical copy, you can always download the report. So the report that you download, you can either do all pages or you just do a single page, and then you generate a report on that individual, which you then have a hard copy of that you can email or do whatever you want to do with. Just again, a word of warning, if I suddenly disappear, it is the power that's gone out. What I want to show you here is I'm going to show you 2 little things that you can do. If you need to create fields, if you've got the information here, but you want to combine things, let's say we don't like surname and name as 2 separate fields, we would like to combine them into 1 field. You have this option to say add a field, right? I haven't really used the add a parameter before, but of course that is another option that you can have. You're more than welcome to go and explore it. Something I've been curious about, just haven't got time to. So let's say combo, and the formula, it's kind of similar to what you're going to do in Google Sheets or Excel. The only difference is you don't start with an equals. It knows that this is an equals. So here we're going to use concat, right? So we're going to use concatenate. From there, I think you should be able to figure it out. We're going to use concatenate there. and we'll use learner name, and then we're going to create a new field. So here's our new field. It is our combo, and you'll see once we have combo there, I can drag combo in, and I can just get rid of surname name. Right, there we go. So one thing I completely forgot about with individual, because this doesn't actually show us who we are talking about. There's different ways of doing it, but what I tend to do is I tend to just add a chart. I'll add a little table here. Okay, now I've got my combo option. I'm going to add my combo, take that away. Right, and then you just kind of remove the things that you don't need. For example, when I get to style, now I'm trying to find it quickly. I don't want to show the header. I'm not going to show row numbers, and I'm not going to show pagination. So there, I've only got it immediately. It shows up like that, and I can just kind of add the values and the entries that I still need. So we'll probably add grade and class. And again, grade and class is another thing that's quite nice to combine. And we actually want only one row per page. So now it's generating it like that. We will make it as big as possible. And now when I enter this, A100, it'll tell me the learner's name. It's not tracking that. Right, so there we go. Now it's there is the name that we are looking for. Bovage of a day has only the one entry in October. Right. While I still have power, thank you very much. I would love to go into a little bit more detail. I think this is a lot to play around with. You are obviously more than welcome to contact me. I'm really keen to see how people build on these concepts and people start developing their own systems. This can be applied in so many different areas. We build a lot of data studios these days because it helps us to understand what's going on in our schools. It helps everyone to have an overview of what's happening. So